The winter wind howled through the streets of Silver Creek, Colorado, on Christmas Eve 1889, carrying with it the promise of snow and the weight of old sorrows. 8-year-old Timothy Walsh pressed his face against the frosted window of Morrison's general store, watching the tall, lone figure of rancher Jake Thornton tie his horse to the hitching post outside. Jake Thornton was a man the town knew by reputation more than by friendship. At 42, he ran the largest cattle operation in the territory, but he kept to himself, coming to town only for supplies and speaking to no one unless necessary. The townspeople whispered that he'd lost his wife and child years ago, and that grief had turned him into a hermit who trusted no one and cared for nothing but his land and his cattle. "Mama," Timothy whispered to his mother, Rebecca Walsh, who was selecting fabric for a new dress. "Why does Mr. Thornton always look so sad?" Rebecca glanced toward the window, seeing Jake's weathered face and the heavy way he carried himself. As the town's school teacher and one of the few people who bothered to learn everyone's story, she knew more about Jake Thornton's tragedy than most. "Some people carry pain that's too heavy to set down, Timothy," she said gently. "Mr. Thornton lost people he loved very much, and sometimes that makes it hard to remember how to smile." Timothy was quiet for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket, the only thing he had left of his father, who had died in a mining accident 3 years earlier. Maybe this could help him remember, Timothy said simply. Rebecca knelt down to her son's level. "Timothy, that locket is all we have left of your papa. Are you sure you want to give it away?" Timothy nodded solemnly. "Papa always said that love grows bigger when you share it, not smaller. And Mr. Thornton looks like he needs to remember that someone cares about him." Before Rebecca could stop him, Timothy had slipped out of the store and was approaching Jake, who was loading supplies into his wagon with the mechanical efficiency of a man going through motions without feeling. "Excuse me, Mr. Thornton," Timothy said politely, his small voice barely audible over the wind. Jake looked down, surprised to see the boy in his years of coming to Silver Creek. The townspeople had learned to give him space, understanding that he preferred solitude to conversation. "What do you want, boy?" Jake's voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the weariness of a man who had forgotten how to interact with children. Timothy held out the locket, his small hands steady despite the cold. "I wanted to give you this for Christmas." Jake stared at the tarnished silver locket, confusion evident on his weather-beaten face. "Why would you give me anything? I don't even know you. My name's Timothy Walsh. My mama is the school teacher, and I wanted to give this to you because—" Timothy paused, searching for the right words. "Because everyone deserves to have something beautiful on Christmas, and you always look like you don't have anything beautiful in your life." The simple honesty of the statement hit Jake like a physical blow. He knelt down to Timothy's level, studying the boy's earnest face. "This looks important, son. Shouldn't you keep it? It was my papa's. He died in the mine collapse 3 years ago. But he taught me that the best way to honor people we love is to share their love with others who need it." Jake's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the locket. When he opened it, he found a small photograph of a man who looked remarkably like Timothy, and on the opposite side, an engraving that read, "Love never dies. It only changes form." Something deep in Jake's chest, something that had been frozen for 8 years, began to crack. He looked at Timothy with new eyes, seeing not just a child, but a bearer of wisdom that Jake had forgotten existed. "Timothy," Jake said softly, this is the most precious gift anyone has given me in a very long time." "Do you really think so?" "Mama says I'm too young to understand about grown-up sadness, but I think sadness is sadness. Whether you're 8 or 40, Jake was quiet for a long moment, turning the locket over in his hands. "How old are you?" Timothy. 8. "My papa died when I was 5, so I've been the man of the house for 3 years now. Mama works real hard teaching all the children, and I help her however I can." "And your mama never remarried?" Timothy shook his head. "She says Papa was her one true love, and some people only get one. But she also says that doesn't mean we stop loving other people, it just means we love them differently." Jake felt tears prick his eyes for the first time in years. This boy, who had lost his father so young, somehow understood truths about love and loss that Jake had spent 8 years trying to deny. "Timothy," Jake said, standing and looking toward the general store where Rebecca was watching through the window with a mixture of pride and concern. "Would you and your mother like to come to my ranch for Christmas dinner tomorrow? I haven't celebrated Christmas in a long time, but I think it might be time to remember how." Timothy's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? Could we? I've never been to a real ranch, really." "And Timothy," Jake fingered the locket gently, "thank you. This gift, it's going to change everything." As Timothy ran back to tell his mother the wonderful news, Jake climbed into his wagon with a lightness in his step that had been absent for nearly a decade. The locket rested in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and for the first time in 8 years, Jake Thornton found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The boy had given him more than a piece of jewelry. He had given him a reminder that love, once planted, never truly dies, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected sources. As he drove his wagon out of town, Jake began making mental plans for Christmas dinner, wondering if he still remembered how to cook for guests, how to open his home to others, and most importantly, how to open his heart to the possibility that his story of love and loss might not be over after all. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear over the Thornton Ranch, and for the first time in 8 years, Jake woke up with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with cattle or chores. He had spent the previous evening cleaning his house, really cleaning it, not just the perfunctory tidying he'd done for years, and attempting to remember recipes his late wife Sarah had used for special occasions. The ranch house, built for a family but occupied by a solitary man for so long, felt different as Jake prepared for his guests. He had opened the curtains in rooms that had been kept dark, dusted furniture that hadn't been touched in years, and even retrieved Christmas decorations from the attic where they had gathered dust since Sarah and little Emma had died. Jake fingered Timothy's locket, which he had worn through the night, feeling its weight against his chest like a talisman of hope. The inscription, "Love never dies. It only changes form," had become a meditation, a reminder that perhaps his capacity for connection hadn't died with his family, but had simply been waiting for the right moment to reemerge. Round noon, Jake heard the sound of an approaching wagon and looked out to see Rebecca Walsh driving a small buggy with Timothy beside her, both of them bundled in their warmest clothes and clearly excited about their adventure. "Welcome to the Thornton Ranch," Jake called out as he helped Rebecca down from the buggy, surprised at how natural it felt to extend hospitality after so many years of isolation. "Mr. Thornton, thank you so much for inviting us," Rebecca said warmly. "Timothy couldn't sleep last night. He was so excited." "Just Jake, please. And the pleasure is mine. It's been—" Jake paused, calculating, 8 years since I've had guests for Christmas. "I'm a little out of practice." Timothy was already exploring, his eyes wide with wonder at the expansive ranch, the sturdy buildings, and the cattle visible in the distance. "Jake, how many cows do you have?" "About 300 head, Jake replied, finding himself smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "Would you like to see them up close after dinner?" "Could I? I've never seen real cowboys and cattle except from far away." Rebecca watched this interaction with growing amazement. The man she had observed from a distance, grim, solitary, seemingly carved from stone, was showing flashes of warmth and even humor as he responded to her son's excitement. "Timothy," Rebecca said gently, "let's let Mr. Thornton Jake show us his home first." Jake led them through the ranch house, and Rebecca couldn't help but notice the signs of a life interrupted. Photographs turned face down on tables, a child's toys gathering dust on a shelf, a woman's rocking chair positioned by the fireplace, but clearly unused for years. "You have a beautiful home," Rebecca said tactfully. "It was beautiful once," Jake replied quietly. "My wife Sarah had a gift for making a house feel like a home. After she and our daughter Emma died of fever, I suppose I forgot how to live here instead of just existing here." Timothy, with the directness of childhood, walked over to one of the face-down photographs and looked at Jake questioningly. "Could I see them, your family?" Jake hesitated for a moment, then gently turned the photograph upright. It showed a younger Jake with a beautiful woman and a little girl. who looked to be about 6 years old, all three of them laughing at something outside the camera's view. Sarah was the kindest woman in Colorado, Jake said softly, and Emma was curious about everything, just like you, Timothy. She would have loved having another child to play with. Timothy studied the photograph with the serious attention that children sometimes bring to adult emotions. They look really happy. I bet they still love you, even though they're in heaven. I hope so, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. Rebecca stepped forward, recognizing that this moment was both precious and fragile. Jake, what can Timothy and I do to help with dinner? Actually, Jake said, seeming to shake himself back to the present, I was hoping you might be willing to help me remember how to cook for a family. I've been making meals for one for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to make Christmas special. We'd love to help, Rebecca said warmly. Timothy is actually quite good in the kitchen. He helps me prepare lessons for the school children, and cooking is just another kind of learning. For the next hour, the three of them worked together in Jake's kitchen, with Rebecca gently guiding Jake through recipes he remembered Sarah making, and Timothy enthusiastically helping with simple tasks while chattering about school, his friends, and his dreams of someday seeing the ocean. As they cooked, Jake found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Timothy's endless questions about ranch life gave him a chance to share stories he had buried, and Rebecca's gentle presence reminded him of conversations he had forgotten he missed. Jake, Timothy said as they waited for the roast to finish. Cooking, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think your wife and daughter would be happy that we're here today? Jake looked down at the boy, then at Rebecca, who was watching him with kind, understanding eyes. You know what, Timothy, I think they would be very happy. Sarah always said this house was too big for just our little family, and that we should have friends over more often. I think she would love knowing that you helped me remember how to celebrate Christmas. And Emma? Jake smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Emma would have insisted on showing you every corner of the ranch, teaching you to ride her pony, and probably trying to convince you to stay forever so she'd have someone to play with. As the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, filling the house with golden light, Jake realized that Timothy's simple gift of a locket had done more than remind him of love. It had reminded him of life, of joy, and of the possibility that honoring the past didn't require abandoning the future. The timer for the roast chimed, and Jake pulled the perfectly cooked meat from the oven, filling the house with the aroma of a real Christmas dinner. But more than the food, it was the sound of laughter and conversation, the presence of people who cared about each other, that made the house feel like a home again. The Christmas dinner at the Thornton Ranch was a feast not just of food, but of rediscovered connection. Jake had outdone himself with the help of Rebecca and Timothy, and the dining room table that had sat empty for 8 years was now laden with roast beef, potatoes, vegetables from Rebecca's garden that she had preserved for winter, and even an apple pie that Timothy had helped assemble. Jake, Rebecca said as they sat down to eat, this is wonderful. I can see why Sarah loved this place. Jake looked around the dining room, seeing it through fresh eyes. The afternoon light streaming through the windows, the good china he had retrieved from storage, the sound of Timothy's cheerful chatter, it all combined to create something he had thought was lost forever. You know, Jake said thoughtfully, I always thought that honoring Sarah and Emma meant keeping everything exactly as they left it, preserving their memory by freezing time. But sitting here with you both, I'm starting to think that maybe the best way to honor them is to let this house be filled with life and laughter again. Timothy, who had been carefully cutting his meat into manageable pieces, looked up seriously. My mama says that when people die, they don't want us to stop living. They want us to live extra good to make up for all the living they can't do anymore. Rebecca smiled at her son with pride. Timothy has his father's wisdom about these things. Tell me about your husband, Jake said to Rebecca. Timothy mentioned he died in a mining accident. Rebecca's expression grew tender. Thomas was like sunshine. He could find joy in the smallest things, a good sunrise, Timothy taking his first steps, a particularly beautiful horse. He worked in the mines because it paid well enough for us to save for a little farm of our own. But his real dream was to raise horses. He sounds like a good man, the best, and like your Sarah. He made our little house feel like a palace just by being in it. Jake fingered Timothy's locket through his shirt. How do you do it? How do you keep going after losing someone like that? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. At first, I didn't think I could. Timothy was only 5, and I was so angry at God, at the mine, at Thomas for leaving us. But then I realized that Timothy needed me to be more than just his mother. He needed me to show him how to carry love forward, instead of letting it turn into bitterness. And how do you do that? Timothy answered before his mother could. You share it with other people who need it. Like how I shared Papa's locket with you because you looked like you needed to remember that somebody cares about you. Jake was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the wisdom of this 8-year-old boy who had experienced loss but somehow maintained his capacity for generosity. Timothy, Jake said finally, can I tell you something about that locket? Sure. Jake pulled the locket from his shirt and opened it, showing Timothy the photograph and inscription again. When I first saw this, I thought it was just a beautiful sentiment, but spending today with you and your mother, I'm beginning to understand what it really means. What do you think it means? I think it means that when we love someone, that love doesn't disappear when they die. It changes format, becomes part of how we treat other people, how we open our hearts, how we make room for new love without forgetting the old. Rebecca looked at Jake with new understanding. You're thinking about Sarah and Emma. I'm thinking that they would want me to be the kind of man who could welcome a lonely school teacher and her son for Christmas dinner. They would want me to be someone who could receive a gift from a child with grace and who could offer friendship to people who might need it. Timothy beamed. So the locket is working. Jake laughed a real, hearty laugh that surprised all three of them. Yes, Timothy, the locket is working. But more than that, you're working. Your kindness, your wisdom, your willingness to see past my grumpy exterior to the person underneath, that's what's really changing my life. As they finished dinner and moved to the living room, where Jake had built a fire in the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years, Timothy made an observation that would prove prophetic. Jake, I think this is the best Christmas I've ever had, and I think it's the best Christmas my mama has had since Papa died. Rebecca blushed slightly but nodded. Timothy's right. It's been wonderful to share this day with you. Jake looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, seeing not just the school teacher who had raised a remarkable son, but a woman who had faced loss with grace, who had built a life of service and love despite her own grief. Rebecca, Jake said carefully, I want you to know that today has meant more to me than I know how to express. You and Timothy have given me back something I thought was gone forever. What's that? Hope. Hope that my story isn't over, that there might be more chapters to write. As the evening wound down, and Rebecca prepared to take Timothy home, Jake found himself reluctant to let them leave. The house that had felt like a mausoleum that morning now felt alive again, and he wasn't ready to return to solitude. Rebecca, he said as she gathered their coats, would you and Timothy like to come back sometime? I mean, not just for special occasions, maybe for regular dinners, or so Timothy could learn about ranching. Or, Timothy jumped up excitedly. Could we? Could I learn to ride horses and help with the cattle? Rebecca looked at Jake with a mixture of hope and caution. Are you sure? We don't want to impose on your hospitality. You wouldn't be imposing. Jake said earnestly, you'd be helping me remember how to live instead of just surviving. As they said their goodbyes and Jake watched their buggy disappear into the winter night, he realized that Timothy's gift had done exactly what the boy had intended. It had reminded him that love grows bigger when you share it, not smaller. The locket rested warm against his chest, but warmer still was the feeling in his heart that told him his life was about to change in ways he had never dared to hope for. 6 months later, the Thornton Ranch buzzed with life in a way it hadn't since Sarah and Emma's time. Timothy had become Jake's eager apprentice, learning to ride, helping with cattle drives, and absorbing ranch wisdom with the enthusiasm that made him exceptional at everything he attempted. Rebecca had begun spending her summer break helping Jake organize his household and teaching him to read the books that had gathered dust since his wife's death. But the most significant change was in Jake himself. The bitter, isolated man who had hidden from the world had been replaced by someone who smiled easily. laughed often, and had rediscovered his capacity for love. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching Timothy practice his riding skills in the corral, Jake pulled out the silver locket that had started everything. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about this locket a lot lately." "What about it?" "About what Timothy said when he gave it to me, that love grows bigger when you share it, not smaller. I think I finally understand what that means." Rebecca looked at him with curious, gentle eyes. "Tell me." "It means that loving Sarah and Emma doesn't prevent me from loving you and Timothy. It means that the love I learned from them prepared my heart to recognize love when it appeared again." Rebecca's breath caught. "Jake, I'm not asking you to replace Sarah, because no one could. And I'm not trying to replace Thomas in your heart. But I am asking if there might be room in your life for a man who has learned to love again because of your son's wisdom and your own grace." Before Rebecca could answer, Timothy came riding up on his pony, his face flushed with excitement and achievement. "Did you see that? I jumped the low fence without falling off." "We saw, sweetheart," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're becoming quite the horseman." Timothy looked between Jake and his mother, sensing the emotional weight of the moment with the intuition that children sometimes possess. "Are you going to marry my mama?" Timothy asked Jake directly. Jake laughed, both surprised and charmed by the boy's directness. "Well, I was hoping to ask her properly. But since you brought it up, Rebecca, would you and Timothy consider becoming part of my family officially?" Timothy whooped with joy. "Yes. Can we live on the ranch all the time? Can I have my own horse? Can I help run the cattle?" Rebecca was crying now, but they were tears of joy. "Jake, are you sure marriage is? Marriage is what happens when two people decide they're better together than apart," Jake said, taking her hand. "And when do people want to give a child the gift of a complete family? What about Sarah and Emma? Will there be room for all of us in your heart?" Jake opened the locket and showed Rebecca the inscription again. "Love never dies. It only changes form. My love for them taught me how to love you and Timothy. They're not competitors for my affection. They're the reason I have affection to give." The wedding took place in September in the church in Silver Creek with the entire town in attendance. Timothy served as best man, proudly carrying his father's locket, which Jake wore on his watch chain as a symbol of the love that had brought them all together. In his wedding speech, Jake told the story of how an 8-year-old boy had given him a locket on Christmas Eve and changed his life forever. "Timothy taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of love," Jake said, looking at his new family. "Sometimes it's just love waiting for the right moment to transform into something new." 1 year later, the Thornton Ranch was home to 4 people: Jake, Rebecca, Timothy, and baby Sarah, Emma Thornton, named for the 2 women who had loved Jake and taught him that the heart's capacity for love is infinite. Timothy, now 9 and wise beyond his years, often told visitors the story of how he gave a sad rancher a locket on Christmas Eve and discovered that sometimes the best way to keep love alive is to give it away. The locket still rested close to Jake's heart, but now it represented not just memory, but possibility, the understanding that love, once planted, grows in directions we never expect, creating families from strangers, hope from despair, and joy from the simple act of caring enough to reach out to someone who needs to be reminded that they matter. On quiet evenings when the ranch work was done and the family gathered on the porch, Jake would sometimes catch sight of Timothy teaching his baby sister about the stars, or Rebecca humming as she mended clothes, and he would touch the locket gently, knowing that Thomas Walsh and Sarah and Emma Thornton were somehow present in these moments of ordinary happiness. The inscription had proven true. Love never dies. It only changes form, growing stronger and more beautiful with each generation that learns to carry it forward.